Chapter 9. All day Saturday, Melody had been on a loop of questions with no answers. Why had he kissed her like that? Why had he kissed her at all? After all, they had talked about the fact that he had no interest in her, like that anyway. And then he went and kissed her like he did. Or maybe that was how he kissed everybody. She thought about asking Farron, but one look at her slick smile and the doe eyes she was making at the cute guy buying tennis shoes struck that idea off the list. No, Blaine Donovan had no real interest in her, and letting herself believe he might was a great way to go through a heartache she wanted no part of. It was that thought alone which had gotten her through an entire afternoon of reshelving shoes, but even that thought evaporated when she turned onto her street at 7 and saw AJ's new silver SUV sitting in her driveway. Oh no, you've got to be kidding me. Keep driving, Mel, just keep driving. What good can possibly come from stopping? Anger swelled inside her, followed closely by solid resolve as she pulled up next to the curb. He wasn't her babysitter, he wasn't her parent. After last night, he was hardly even her friend. She got out just as he came out the front door, and every horrid emotion she'd been running from slithered right over her. "I'll be sure to tell her," he said to her mother, who stood in the door behind him. His wave stopped mid-path when he turned and saw Melody getting out of the car. "Oh, good," her mother called. "You made it, sweetheart. Look who stopped by." Melody didn't so much as acknowledge the statement. She went around and popped her trunk and hauled out her purse and backpack. Knowing she would have to go up there sooner or later, she defiantly chose later, choosing instead to rummage and gather up stuff she'd been collecting for a month. A minute, 2, and she heard her mother say goodnight. He was coming. She knew it. She could feel it. Hands full, she stood just as AJ stepped up to the little car. "Done?" he asked. She shrugged as he reached for the trunk lid and slammed it. Then he planted his hands on his hips, blocking her path to the sidewalk. His gaze went straight into her. "Listen, I think we need to talk." "About what?" But her attention snagged on the sweater that was falling out of the pile in her hand. She swung it, trying to get it back into her control. It didn't work. "About you and these guys you are choosing to date." The tiny laugh jumped from her. "What are you, my guardian? I'm a big girl, AJ. I can take care of myself." Annoyance trumped over her when the sweater slipped a little closer to the ground. Without asking, AJ reached down, retrieved it, and piled it on top. "You've got to know I'm worried about you, Mel. I can't help it. I am. First Bobby, and now this guy, Blaine. You've got to know this isn't smart." "You don't know anything about Blaine. He's a nice guy." "He's an arrogant, selfish jerk. That's plain from 100 yards away. What I can't figure out is why you can't see it." "You just don't know him." "I don't have to. Remember when we were in school, how the jocks treated everybody like they were dirt on somebody's shoes? That's the way this guy is. He thinks he's better than everybody else. And what's up with this bar fight thing? Do you really want to go out with somebody who thinks a good time is going out and getting smashed up at a bar?" He didn't start the fight, but he didn't walk away either. "And your point is?" "My point is you deserve better, Mel. These guys are serious trouble. How can you not see that?" She felt something else slip from her grasp, and she struggled not to drop everything right there on the asphalt. "Yeah? Well, that's just too bad, because I like Blaine, and he likes me, and there's not really anything you can do about that." It was all a lie, of course, but she didn't care. She would not give him the satisfaction of telling him they had no intention of seeing each other again. "Now, if you'll excuse me." She yanked whatever it was back up to her and swung it all to the side to mount the curb. "Mel, come on. You don't have to be like this." On that, she turned on her toe to face him. "I don't have to be like this? I'm not the one who changed. I'm not the one who fell in love and got married and moved off." It wasn't fair how cute he looked in his backward cap and blue and white jersey. Come on, Mel, that's not fair. What did you think? I'd live out here forever? Did you think I'd never get married? Never have a life? She didn't know what she'd thought, but what she did know at this moment was that she hurt. Badly. I've got to go. Think about what I said, he called after her. When she got to the front door, what she had hoped would be a clean getaway became a wreck of yanking and pushing and throwing things into the house. How dare he come over here and start lecturing her on who she could and couldn't date? How dare he be so condescending and hurtful toward Blaine? Blaine, who had gone out of his way to come and see her when she was sick. That was a whole lot more than AJ ever thought about doing. Did he come and visit? No. Even his wife had to call because he was too busy or couldn't be bothered. Such a great friend he thought he was. Yeah, right. Well, he could stay busy for all she cared. She had no desire to see AJ Knight ever again. That was just all there was to it. For 4 days, Melody had been spinning in the inexplicable cauldron of guys and their intentions. She had finally come to the judicious decision that none of them could be trusted and that they all had a duplicitous agenda. Bobby, Blaine, AJ, they were all the same. They used you for the time it worked for them, and then just like that, you were a nobody again. Blaine hadn't called. Not that she expected him to, but that kiss on the front porch had been enough to make one small part of her hope. By Tuesday, she had killed that one small part. She hated herself for being taken in by his sweet talk and charms. He was a snake, just like all of them. In fact, the kiss was probably just a warm-up for him to see how far she would go with him. After all, they'd been out a few times by now, and true to form, he expected a little something in return. She hated him. She really did. She hated all of them for no other reason than they were guys and they were jerks. On Wednesday, she went up the center stairs and caught sight of Blaine talking with Lana What's-Her-Name on the mirror staircase. Melody could have thrown up. Those two deserved each other. She kept climbing. I promise, Blaine, it'll be lots of us. It's Carly's birthday. She said to tell everybody, Lana said. Her long blonde hair was pulled back from her chisel-angled face. The straight nose, the preppy clothes, they spoke of high expectations of life. I don't know, I'm working until 9 Friday. Perfect. That perky voice and bounce were so fake. We can meet over at Bar Houston about 10. She lowered her lashes at him. You know, it's so nice to have a friend to be able to ask out. I hate going by myself. I thought you said there'd be lots of people. Oh, there will be, but I hate being odd man out. So you'll go then? I guess. By the time class was over, Melody's whole spirit was wrapped tightly around fury at the whole male population. The pop quiz Professor Warner sprang on them didn't help at all. When she went down the stairs, trying not to look for Blaine, her brain started again around the endless loop of why he had ever agreed to go with her in the first place. Face it, even 12 pounds couldn't make that much of a difference. The thought of stopping for a big cheeseburger and fries on the way home stabbed into her. As she pushed out into the deepening night, she debated the thought. No one would know. More to the point, no one would even care. They hadn't noticed up to now. Why should they start now? It was movement to the far right of the far parking lot that caught her eye first. She glanced that direction, not even really paying attention, but a snap of recognition stopped her. Slowing, she crossed next to a car parked in one of the center spots. Her gaze drilled through the darkness at the figure standing across the way. It was Blaine. She was sure of it. But he wasn't standing next to the little gold sports car. Instead, he was working diligently to get the door to a horrible little green something or other open. His project sat atop the trunk. Melody sank closer to her shield, hoping he wouldn't turn around and see her. What in the world was he doing anyway? Surely he wouldn't be breaking into someone else's car. Not out here in the open like this. Her heart lodged in her throat at the implications of what she was seeing. Besides, what would he want to break into that car for? It didn't look like it even ran. It wasn't like he was going to steal the thing. At that moment, the car door he was working with came open, and he glanced around the parking lot. Ducking farther, she managed not to be seen. He quickly stowed the project in the back, got in, and after one unsuccessful try, finally got the car started. The headlights slashed through the darkness and then sliced across the parking lot before he pulled out into traffic. Melody kept her safe hiding spot, ducking so he definitely wouldn't see her as he drove away. When he was gone, she stood, staring after him. Did that make any sense at all? If it did, she couldn't find it. After work Friday, Blaine seriously considered not going to Bar Houston. Lana would be mad, that was a given, but surely he could come up with something plausible, something so she would give him a break about not showing up. Then again, there was that final project he'd been roped into being her partner for. He had to find a way to quit sitting next to her. With a sigh, he realized that not showing up could adversely affect his grade, not to mention his future. So he turned in the direction of Bar Houston as he exited the mall parking lot. He would put in a little FaceTime, make her happy, and then beg off with some excuse about another party or something. When the lie of his real life had become so draining, he couldn't really tell, but for now, it was a necessary evil. They didn't know, and they wouldn't. It was too important to his future. When he graduated, he would need contacts, good contacts, maybe even an internship. Lana's family was well connected. Her father owned one of the largest design offices in Southeast Texas. It wasn't that he wanted to use her for that connection, but he certainly didn't want to do anything to jeopardize it either. As he neared the bar, he loosened his tie and then took it off altogether. Stuffy and stodgy was not the dress code at Bar Houston. Upwardly mobile, yes. Stuffed suit, no. He flipped the tie into the side seat and unbuttoned the top button of his dress shirt. He wondered how Dylan was doing at Mrs. Rodriguez's. The thought of calling and checking crossed his mind, but he had no way of doing that. He'd just have to trust that things were fine. 3 blocks from the bar, he found an out-of-the-way office building parking garage and pulled into it. There was no reason to get Peyton's car tonight. This would work just fine. He slipped out of the car and hurried down the darkened streets. The thumping of the music and the noise of the crowd was unmistakable. He so remembered when he and Peyton had snuck in with Peyton's friends' IDs. Strange how that seemed like a lifetime ago. At the line, he attached himself to the end and looked at his watch. 10:15. He wondered if she was already inside. Probably. He looked for her half-heartedly in line, but gave up. There were too many people and not enough interest to sustain the search. The line moved surprisingly quickly, and in no time he was in the midst of the crowd inside. The thumping music thundered through his body. When the headache had started, he didn't know, but he was pretty sure the music wasn't helping. He angled his steps over to the rounded booths. That's where most of the groups usually met up. Hand in pocket, he searched through the haze, wondering if he might indeed not find her and be able to have a reason to go home. A couple stepped out in front of him from one of the tables, and he ducked to the side. "Excuse me." "Sorry." It was only when he looked up that the horror of the situation flooded over him. His glance behind AJ, who stood in front of him, took in Eve. "Oh, hi," Blaine swallowed, wishing he'd heeded the whispering of his spirit to not come. "Hey, Blaine," Eve said, holding out her hand with a slight glance at her husband. "I didn't expect to see you here." He shook her hand and then watched it drop back between her and AJ. "Yeah, some friends of mine asked me." "Blaine, honey, good, you made it. Finally, I've been looking everywhere for you." How, why, he didn't know, but suddenly Lana practically smashed into him. He caught her so she didn't fall right over him, and in the next second, her arms were around him. One around his waist, the other scrawled up his chest and to his neck. One whiff told him she'd been drinking, and a memory of the last time he was with her when she was drinking snaked through him. He tried to corral her ardor, but it didn't work very well. "Lana, I'd like you to meet my Well, this is Eve and AJ. He was vaguely aware that he should know and recognize the others sitting at their table, but putting logical names with faces was impossible at that moment. He fought to look calm and cool, even as Lana gazed up at him with that dull, loopy smile, which wasn't helping at all. So, are you all out celebrating? He glanced at the others at their table. Just out, Eve said, her gaze going to Lana every other second. There was a long pause, filled only by the music. Well, it was nice to see you. Yeah, you too. He looked down at Lana and tried to find an appropriate smile for the situation. Well, we'd better go. Y'all have fun. Y'all too, Eve said. It was not lost on Blaine that AJ looked like he'd just eaten a vat of uncooked octopus. Turning with Lana still hanging on him, Blaine beat it for another spot. They seem nice, she said in that sickly sweet voice that raked right over his nerves. Yeah. His mood, which had been less than enthusiastic prior to now, dropped all the way to sullen and snarky as they joined her friends. At odd moments, he tried to be the cool, super fun guy those at Lana's table had seen on other occasions. But the truth was, he just couldn't get there tonight. It felt way too much like an act, and the truth was, he was getting really sick of acting. Every so often, on his way to or back from the dance floor, he glanced over to their table. There were 6 of them, although he was having trouble remembering the others' names. One was Jeff, he thought. Yeah, that sounded right. Gabe? That seemed right too, but the 2 women, he couldn't find those names no matter how hard he tried. Back at his own table, his gaze went across the way to Eve's table, but was jerked back to his own by Lana and her 1,000 ways to convince a guy she was serious. Hey, he said just before midnight as her hand drifted a bit high up on his thigh. He turned and looked at her. Come on, Lan, we talked about this. We're just friends, remember? She pouted her disappointment. But I thought... It's not happening, okay? I've told you that. I like you. I do, but not like that. A seductive smile spread to her lips. Like what, then? Like this? She slithered over him, drawing his mouth to hers. Backing up, he would have gone through the wall to get away from her. He pushed her backward. Hey, seriously, it's not happening. Okay? Not tonight. Not ever. She crossed her arms over her ample chest. Then what good was asking you? He was wondering the same thing. Hey, dude, Peyton drawled through the phone the next evening. I was just wondering if you were still coming to Daphne's tonight. It's going to be off the chain. Oh, can't, Blaine said, scraping the molded contents of a bowl into the trash. I just went out last night with some friends. What? 2 nights in a row too much for an old man like you? The disgusting mold of the next pot in the sink stuck like glue to the side of it. He shouldered the phone and scraped harder. I've got a lot to do here. I haven't been home in what seems like ages. You sound like my mother. Hey, your mom's cool. You, my friend, are getting older by the minute. I thought you were bringing Melanie. Melody. And no, you said I should bring her. I never actually agreed. What, you two too good for us? No. He stacked that pan with the others to the left of the sink. Now he knew for certain he should have begged off last night's anaconda fight to do the dishes. Lana wouldn't have understood, but it would have been so much more productive than living through 4 hours of an all-out nightmare. It's just I've really got a lot to do tonight. Finals are coming up, and I've got this final project I need to be working on, and... Uh-oh, I hear them. Do you hear them? Those tiny violins. Aren't they cute? Peyton paused. Well, if you're just going to bail on us again, then... I'm not bailing. Okay, I am, but for a good reason. There was another pause before Peyton tisked his tongue. You are seriously scaring me, my brother. Next time, Blaine said, not meaning a word of it. I'm going to hold you to that. Something told Blaine that was more a threat than a promise. Melody was elbow-deep in biology notes when her mother called from downstairs. Mel, phone. Phone? On Saturday night at 9:30? It could only be one person, and that person she did not want to talk to. Reluctantly, she tramped down the stairs to the kitchen where she grabbed the phone and plopped into a kitchen chair. Hello? Hey there, what are you up to? A smile slid to her face at the sound of Blaine's voice. Not much, what are you up to? Thank goodness it wasn't AJ like she'd assumed. Being bored. Bored? What's up with that? I figured a popular guy like you would have 1,000 parties to go to on the weekend. Nah, one invite, but I didn't really want to go. Oh yeah? Why not? The sigh came through loud and clear. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Besides, it sounded like much more fun to call you. Ah, yes, I am such scintillating company. I would much prefer me to the Houston glitterazzi as well. He laughed, which should have been hurtful, but strangely it didn't feel that way. So, how's your week been? For one moment, she thought about mentioning the little green car, but it all still seemed too strange, so she didn't. Pretty much just work and school. You ready for finals? Trying to be. Biology's going to eat my lunch, though. Ugh, there's a disgusting thought. Melody laughed outright. You've got a point there. She took a breath. No, it's the whole systems thing. What systems belong to which organism? That gives me fits. Well, why don't you let me help you? I've still got my notes from last semester here. I could quiz you or something. That struck her as odd. Why would you do that? Because I'm bored, remember? 2 hours later, when Blaine hung up, he couldn't help but be happy he had called. Somehow, spending time with her, even over the phone, had a way of lifting his whole spirit. He went into the living room where he found Dylan asleep on the floor. Guilt swept through him. He should have been spending his free time with his little brother, not calling up girls he had no chance with anyway. With that thought dogging him, he pulled the child to his feet and walked him step for step to his room. He vowed to spend more time with the child once school was over. He would have a week or two before intercession and summer school. Surely there was something fun they could do. However, as he went to his room to get ready for bed, his thoughts turned once again from Dylan to Melody. The smile came unbidden. Although it made no sense and he might have no chance with her, for this moment, all he wanted was to be with her. Life would have to sort everything else out after that. All week long, Melody fantasized about what it would be like to see him again on Wednesday. She had this whole scenario of meeting him at the stairs and him sweeping her off her feet running on loop in her brain. What she didn't plan at all on was making it halfway up the first set of steps and hearing his name right behind her. You and Blaine were looking awful tight Friday night, the voice said, but obviously not to Melody. Her steps slowed and she recalibrated her hearing to behind her. Yeah, well, Lana laughed a flighty little laugh that made Melody want to throw up. You know Blaine, he doesn't really have time for pleasantries. So this final project thing might not end with a project then? We haven't really set anything official yet, or anything. But that's just a matter of time, right? Lana's giggle confirmed all the doubts Melody had done her best to bury. Suddenly, her feet felt like lead, and her heart did too. She kept climbing even as the two girls peeled off for their own class on the second floor. What kind of a game was he playing anyway? Clearly he had gone out with Lana on Friday and done who knew what afterward. So why had he called her on Saturday? And what was a call really worth on balance with going out and going back to someone's place? Frustrated with herself, she stomped into biology. When would she ever learn? Blaine looked for Melody everywhere after class on Wednesday. He'd wanted to be early to have a chance to talk, but there was a catastrophe of Sophoclean proportions in the menswear department, and he'd barely made it to class at all. Hustling out of the room the second the class broke, Blaine was all the way to the stairs before he heard his project partner calling his name. Blaine! He closed his eyes in frustration. Why did she have to sound like a bleating sheep? "Blaine!" She caught up with him at the cusp of the staircase. "What are you running away for, silly? I've got this final layout for the project. I thought we could go over it tonight." Her lashes angled up to him. "Unless you want to get together sometime later this week." "What? No, now is fine." He glanced around once more and then reluctantly leaned toward her, wishing with everything in him that she would hurry this along. "What do you got?" The word humiliation came nowhere close when Melody had made one flight of stairs and come face to face with the true reality of her situation. Together, they stood at the top of the stairs, not trying to hide anything. He stood there, leaning over Lana, who was looking up at him with adoring fawn-like eyes. It was sickening. With one jerk, Melody spun around, slung her backpack to her shoulder, and strode off down the hallway in the opposite direction. Blaine Donovan had made a fool of her for the last time. Students streaming by them was the first indication Blaine had that the classes above had finished. He glanced up from the plans Lana was showing him, and his gaze jumped from face to face, searching for hers. Then he caught sight of her striding the other way down the hall. He tried to decide why. Did she park that way? Was she going to the student union or the library? However, at the double doors, she hit the door so hard it cracked back into the brick wall on the other side. And he knew. Either someone had told her, which was a distinct possibility, or she had seen him with Lana, or both. He glanced down at his project partner, who was gazing up at him with a look that no one could mistake. "Listen, I'll just take this and get back to you." He snatched up the paper and folded it in two. "But we've only got 2 weeks to finish this, and I really want an A on this project, Blaine." "Yeah, so do I, but I don't really have time right now." He stuffed the paper in his backpack and looked back at the vacant door down the hallway. She was gone. There was no hope of catching her now. However, that didn't stop him from trying. He took off in that direction. "I'll call you sometime." She was left only to call after him, "Don't forget." Hot fury burned through Melody. What an idiot she was. And to think she had thought he might actually be interested in her. What a joke. What a bunch of hooey. Blaine Donovan was interested in one person and only one person. And that person was definitely not her. She only wished she had figured that out before her heart got smashed to smithereens in the process. It took one yank to have her car door open. Slinging her stuff in, she jumped in and fired it up. Never again. She wouldn't give him another chance to make her believe his lies. That's what everything that came out of his mouth was. Lies. AJ was right, and she hated Blaine even more for making her think that. Well, Lana could have him. They were perfect for each other. Let them all go on and live their happy lives. She didn't need them, any of them. She would be much, much better off going on with her life as if she'd never heard the names AJ, Eve, and most especially Blaine. Running, Blaine nearly knocked over a knot of students headed out to the parking lots. "Sorry," he called to them, never really slowing down. His feet pounded the pavement. His backpack whacked into his hip as he ran through the first lot, searching before fighting traffic to the second lot. Only when he was there and had surveyed it twice did he accept the fact that once again he had messed up. Once again he had hurt her. Great. Just fabulous. Melody was furious with him, and she had every right to be. In fact, if he liked her at all, he should let her go, let her be. It wasn't fair to keep dragging her into his miserable life. What was that saying? Misery shared is doubled. It was something like that. As he stalked over to the little green Toyota, his thoughts drifted to his parents. His original parents before the divorce that changed everything about everything. That had certainly been true for them. The lock stuck as it always did nowadays. He worked it, jiggled it, pleaded with it, and finally kicked the door out of frustration with his whole depressing life. "I'm sorry," he said, instantly feeling stupid for his outburst. What did kicking the door help anyway? Nothing. Nothing would help. He should get used to it and move on. It was the only thing that made any sense. Nothing had gone any better for 12 straight hours. Blaine woke up late, dumped coffee on the only clean shirt he had, got Dylan to school late, which meant a trip to the principal's office, which made him even later for work. He missed 2 commissions when the customers up and decided to try a different store for no reason he could really see. By the time he made it to the break room at 12:05 to start lunch, he was convinced the day could get no worse. And then it did. "Looks like you're back to normal," Eve said, suddenly standing right next to him at the beverage dispenser. "Huh, that would be nice," he said so contemptuously it caused her to stare at him. He closed his eyes, shook his head, and sighed. "I'm sorry, it hasn't been a great day." "Too much bar hopping, I guess?" There was ice in her tone. Ice he'd never heard there before. "What's that supposed to mean?" He took his sandwich and water over to the table and sat down in a heap. She followed him, sat down primly, and shrugged, looking right at him. "Seems to me you've been partying a lot lately, sowing the wild oats and all that." The condescension in her voice brought out the defensiveness in his. "Sowing the wild oats, huh? That's original." Who was she to question what he did or didn't do with his life anyway? She was only a friend, and barely that. For the longest moment of his life, she sat surveying him. Her gaze crawled into his nervous system and tingled there. "So what's the story with you and Melody anyway?" "Me and Melody? What business was that of hers? What do you care?" Eve pulled herself forward slightly. "Well, for one, Melody is a friend of mine, and I don't like seeing her jerked around. For another, she is like a little sister to AJ, and you toying with her is not going over so well in my household." Blaine snorted at that. "And that gives you the right to run her life, or mine?" A piece of the condescension melted away. "Look, Blaine, I just don't want to see her hurt, that's all." "And you think I do?" "Well, if you're going together like it looked at my house the other night, I can't see how going out partying with some other bimbo the next weekend makes much sense. Unless—" Her pause got his attention, and he looked up. "Unless what?" The look she gave him was at once compassionate and judgmental. "Unless you're the scumbag AJ says you are. Then it makes complete sense." Honestly, he couldn't care a whit what AJ thought, but the fact that he was trashing Blaine to every girl who mattered at all to him didn't sit well. "Well, it doesn't matter anyway." "How's that?" "Me and Mel." The words hurt like fire to say. "We're just friends. There's nothing going on between us." That didn't ease her concern. "And the other night at our house?" The ache over the whole mess spun in turmoil in his heart. "Look, I know she deserves better. She doesn't need an albatross like me hanging around her neck." True compassion took over. "You're not an albatross." Anger and disappointment with himself crowded through his thoughts. "Oh yeah? A minute ago I was a scumbag." Eve heaved a sigh and scrunched her face, slowly scrutinizing him. "You know, I just can't figure you out sometimes. One minute you're this nice guy that I really like being around, and then all of a sudden you're this arrogant jerk who has a real attitude problem. What's up with that?" "Sometimes the real me just comes out. I guess I can't help myself." Her gaze narrowed even further. "And which one is the real you?" The question slammed him into a brick wall. He stared at his glass, not drinking, not really even seeing it. "I don't know." It was a long moment before she continued. "For what it's worth, I think the nice guy fits you much better, but I think you're scared to be him." "Why would I be scared of that?" I don't know. Why would you? Pain tore through him so deep it felt like it ripped the middle of him apart. Because being a jerk is so much easier. Why? Her voice was soft, and she laid her hand on the table, gazing at him. Blaine, you're really selling yourself so short here. That jerk thing only pushes people away and hurts everybody. It's no way to live. Breathing through the ache was becoming impossible. Look, I know how hard you try to impress everybody. A coworker from Shoes strode into the break room and over to the coffee machine. Eve sat back, watching both Blaine and the woman. In minutes she was gone, and Eve sat forward once more. From what I see, you've got a real choice to make here. Oh yeah? What's that? Who you're going to be and how you're going to live your life. Trying to be both at the same time only means you're neither. You really need to take some time to figure out what's important. Her gaze stayed so soft it caressed his bruised and wounded spirit. That's what growing up's about, figuring out what's really important and pegging your life and your actions to that. Growing up. He would be 27 in 3 days. He'd kind of figured the growing up part was over. And that works? Better than anything else I've ever found. Later, as he walked to his car, Blaine thought about Eve's words. Figure out what's really important and peg your life and your actions to that. Figure out what's really important. What's really important. The words slid through his mind, snagging and holding at odd moments as he walked all the way around the perimeter of the mall to the little knot of cars around the lonely tree. He'd been parking here almost since he'd gotten the job. It was part of not letting anyone know what his life was really like. He thought about Eve and sighed with the thought. She didn't even know the real him, not really. She knew what she had seen, but what she had seen was part of the mask, not the man. Blaine got in the car, loosened the tie, and reached for the starter. Lillian didn't even sputter. Oh no, he pleaded to the sky. No, come on, you can't be dead. Not now, not today. He hit the starter again, but it did no more good than the first time. With a deep sigh and small shake of his head, he climbed back out and went to the back to retrieve the jumper cables. 3 cars down, a man walked to his car with his wife and 3 handfuls of bags in tow. Blaine hated this. It was humiliating. Sir? The man looked up, clearly ready to make a break for it if the situation warranted. I'm sorry, Blaine said, stepping closer with the cable still in his hands. My car won't start. Could you... One look at the fear on the man's wife's face, and Blaine's heart fell. They weren't going to help him. Heck, he wouldn't help him. That's okay, he said quickly. I can go back in and get security. He started away. No, the man finally said, his voice deep and booming. That's okay, son. Hook up them cables, I'll pull up next to you. Thankfulness flooded through him, twined generously with guilt. I'm sorry, I know you're really busy. I really appreciate this. He quickly went around to his car, popped the hood, and worked the cables. In mere moments, the man was next to him. He opened the hood and got out, looking remarkably like some mountain. His stature was only enhanced by the yellow straw cowboy hat atop his head. I really appreciate this, Blaine said as he watched the man hook up the cars. A lie about why he was driving such a heap was poised on his lips. It would certainly make the out-of-control firing of his humiliation quotient settle. But just as the words hit his brain to say, he stopped them. Which one are you going to be? Which one? He breathed through the question. Then, in that moment, he made the decision. This car is on its last legs. I'm just doing everything I can to get her 1 more mile down the road. The man stood and smiled at Blaine. I hear you there. We were married 10 years before we could afford anything that didn't die every time we got in it. Relief and hope flooded through Blaine as the man lifted and replaced his hat. Why don't you try it now? In one swift motion, Blaine was behind the wheel. He breathed to settle the excitement and hit the starter. Lillian fired to life with no more effort than that. His smile spread through him. Yes! He climbed out as the ticking sound Lillian had started making knocked in his ears. Thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate this. The man removed the cables and handed them to Blaine, who shook his hand in admiration. Oddly, there wasn't contempt or condescension in the man's face, only respect. You know, a lot of young kids like you wouldn't be caught dead in cars like this. It's nice to see the younger generation recognizing that hard work will get you somewhere. Owning every nice thing out of the box doesn't build anything but debt and fear. It's no shame to drive something you can honestly afford, son. He lifted his hat again and smiled. Remember that. Blaine nodded, understanding more than the man could possibly know. I will. Thank you, sir. You take care, son. All the way home, Blaine had thought about the man and his words. It's no shame to drive something you can honestly afford. He thought about the mask Eve had talked about earlier. As he made the frozen pizza for supper, his thoughts turned to their current living conditions. His gaze went around the sparse, dirty kitchen. It wasn't 4114 Palermo. It wasn't even 2 steps out of hell. And yet, it was what he could afford. When his parents divorced, he had understood enough to know about the debt his father left his mother to shoulder. A house they couldn't afford, 2 beautiful cars on lease that sucked them dry in months. He still remembered the day of the foreclosure sale. It was 2 days after the repo guy had shown up for the cars, and 3 weeks before the bankruptcy. He thought it was the worst day of his life. Yet that was the day, the moment that for him, everything had changed. It was the moment he had accepted the fact that with his father gone, it was up to him to make sure the family survived. With his mother 8 months pregnant and their finances in shambles, he'd had to get a job. And it was a job he'd hung on to tenaciously for 10 years. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills for this place. As he looked around, he realized how much shame he'd been living under for 10 long years. He'd made himself responsible for the fact that they couldn't live in the neighborhoods with pools and maid service. But the truth of the matter was, he had done his best. It wasn't much, but it was something. He thought back to earlier in the parking lot. He'd taken the chance to be who he really was, and it had given him insight and hope such that he had never known before. With everything in him, he wanted to do that more. But just how to do that more was the real question. As he went to work on the project, the question stayed on loop in his brain. And one name kept coming through with the answers he needed. Eve. This has been For Real, Book 3, The Courage Series, written by Staci Stallings, narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2012 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings.
Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.